Some ravens perched on corpses, gorging, unconcerned for the new arrivals. The sickly sweet stench of corruption hung in the dry air, and the acrid smell of char. Iron-strapped gates stood gaping open on an expanse of ruin, soot-streaked stone houses and collapsed roofs. Nothing moved except the birds. Like Maruwa. He tried to shake the thought away, but in his head he could see that great city after it was retaken. Immense towers blackened and collapsing, the remains of great bonfires at every street crossing, where those who had refused to swear to the shadow had been bound and thrown alive to the flames. He knew whose memory it had to be, though he had not discussed it with Moraine. I am Randolph Thor. Loose there in Telamon is dead 3,000 years. I am myself. That was one battle he meant to win. If he did have to die at Shale Ghul, he would die as himself. He made himself think of something else. Half a month since he had left Meridian. Half a month, though the Aiel had set a pace afoot from sunup to sundown that wearied the horses. But Couladin had been moving this way a week before he learned of it. If they had not managed to close any ground, he would have that long to ravage Cairhien before Rand could reach it. Longer, before the Shaido could be brought to bay. Not a much happier thought. There's someone watching us from those rocks to the left, Lance said quietly. He seemed to be completely engrossed in studying what remained of Taion. Not Aiel, or I doubt I would have seen a glimmer. Rand was glad that he had made Egwene and Aviendha stay with the Wise Ones. The town gave him a new reason, but the Watcher fit in with his original plan, when he had hoped that Taion had escaped. Egwene still wore the same Aiel clothes as Aviendha, and Aiel would not have been very welcome in Taion. They were even less likely to be welcome among the survivors. He looked back at the wagons, drawing to a halt a short distance down slope. Water drifted up from the drivers, now that they could see the town clearly, and the wall's decorations. Kadir, his bulk all in white again today, mopped at his hawk-nosed face with a large curtain. He appeared unperturbed, merely pursing his lips thoughtfully. Rand expected that Moraine would have to find new drivers once they were through the pass. Kadir and his crew would likely flee as soon as they had the chance. And he would have to let them go. It was not right. It was not justice. But it was necessary to protect Osmodian. How long now had he been doing what was necessary? In a fair world, they would be one and the same. That made him laugh, a hoarse wheeze. He was far from the village boy he had been. Sometimes that boy sneaked up on him. The others looked at him, and he fought the urge to tell them that he was not mad yet. Long minutes passed before two coatless men and a woman emerged from the rocks, all three ragged and dirty and barefoot. They approached hesitantly, heads tilted uneasily, eyes darting from rider to rider, to the wagons and back, as though they might take flight at a shout. Gaunt cheeks and wavering steps that spoke of hunger. "Thank the light," one of the men said finally. He was gray-haired. None of the three was young. His face deeply creased. His eyes lingered a moment on Osmodian, with balls of lace and collar and cuffs, but the leader of this train would not be riding a mule and carrying a banner. It was Rand's stirrup that he clutched anxiously. "The light be praised that you came out of those terrible lines alive, my lord." That might have been Rand's blue silk coat, embroidered in gold on the shoulders, or the banner, or simple flattery. The man certainly had no reason to think them other than merchants, if well dressed for it. "Those murdering savages have risen again. It is another Aiel war. They were over the wall in the night before anybody knew, killing everyone who raised a hand, stealing everything not mortared in place." "In the night," Matt said sharply. Hat pulled low, he was still studying the ruined town. "Were your sentries asleep? You did have sentries this close to your enemies. Even Aiel would have a hard time coming at you if you kept a good watch." Rand gave him an appraising look. "No, my lord." The gray-haired man blinked at Matt, then gave his answer to Rand. Matt's green coat was fine enough for a lord, but it hung open and looked slept in. We We had only a watchman at each gate. It has been long since any have even seen one of the savages. But this time, whatever they did not steal, they burned, and drove us out to starve. Filthy animals. Thank the light you have come to save us, my lord, or we would all have died here. I am Talnethan. I was a saddle maker. A good one, my lord. This is my sister Aril, and her husband, Undercoil. He makes fine boots. They stole people too, my lord, the woman said, her voice raw. Somewhat younger than her brother, she might have been handsome once, but haggard worry had etched lines in her face that Rand suspected would never entirely go away. Her husband had a lost look in his eyes, as if not exactly sure where he was. My daughter, my lord, and my son. They took all the young ones, everyone above 16, and some twice that or more. Said they were Guy something, and stripped them naked right in the street and herded them off. My lord, can you? She trailed off, eyes squeezing shut as the impossibility overwhelmed her, swaying. Small odds that she would ever see her children again. Moiraine was out of her saddle by Aril's side. The haggard woman gave a loud gasp as soon as the Aes Sedai's hands touched her, shivering to her toe tips. Her wondering look turned to Moiraine questioningly, but Moiraine only held her as if supporting her. The woman's husband suddenly gaped, staring at Rand's gilded belt buckle, the gift from Aviendha. His arms were marked like that, all twined around, like the cliff snake. Tal looked up at Rand uncertainly. The savages lead him, my lord. He had markings like that on his arms. He wore those strange clothes that I did, but he had his coat sleeves down, and he made sure everybody saw. I received in the waist, Rand said. He made sure to keep his hands still on his pommel. His coat sleeves hid his own dragons. They would be visible in his hands to anyone who looked closely. Aril had forgotten about wondering what Moiraine had actually done, and all three looked on the point of running. How long since they left? 6 days, my lord, Tal said uneasily. They did what they did in a night and a day, and were gone the next. We would have gone too, but what if we met them coming back? Surely they would turn back at Selene? That was the town at the other end of the pass. Rand doubted that Selene was in any better condition than Tyen by this time. How many survivors are there besides you three? Maybe 100, my lord. Maybe more. Nobody is counted. Abruptly, anger flared in him, though he tried to hold it down. 100 of you. His voice was icy iron. And 6 days. Then why are your dead left for the ravens? Why do corpses still decorate your town walls? Those are your people, filling your nostrils with their stink. Huddling together, the three backed away from his horse. We were afraid, my lord, Tal said hoarsely. They went, but they could come back. And he told us, the one with the markings on his arms, told us not to touch anything. A message, Anders said in a dull voice. He chose them out to hang, just pulling them out until he had enough to line the wall. Men, women, he did not care. His eyes were fixed on Rand's buckle. He said they were a message for some man who would be following him. He said he wanted this man to know what they were going to do on the other side of the spine. He said he would do worse to this man. Aril's eyes widened suddenly, and the three stared beyond Rand for a moment, gaping. Then, screaming, they turned and ran. Black-veiled Aiel rose from the rocks they had come from, and they darted off in another direction. Veiled Aiel appeared there, too, and they collapsed to the ground, sobbing and holding each other as they were surrounded. Moiraine's face was cool and composed, but her eyes were not serene. Rand twisted in his saddle. Rhuarc and Derek were coming up the slope, unveiling themselves and unwrapping the shufa from around their heads. Derek was thicker than Rhuarc, with a prominent nose and paler streaks through his golden hair. He had wrought the rain Aiel, as Ruark said he would. Timolen and his Mia Goma had been paralleling them to the north for 3 days, exchanging occasional messengers, but giving no clue to his intentions. The Kadara and the Shianda and the Darin were still
Hey, Benny, how you doing, bro?
following, so Amis and the others said, from dream talking to their wise ones, but slowly. Those wise ones had no more idea of their clan chief's aims than Rand did of Timolen's. Was that necessary? He said as the two chiefs came up to him. He had frightened the people first, but for cause, made them think that they were going to die. Ruark simply shrugged, and Derek said, "We put spears in place around this hold unseen as you wished. And there seemed no reason to wait, since no one remained here to dance the spears. Besides, they are only tree killers." Rand drew a deep breath. He had known this might be as large a problem as Couladin in its own way. Nearly 500 years ago, the Aiel had presented Cairhien with a sapling, a cutting from Aben Desora, and with it, life granted to no other nation, to trade across the threefold land to Shara. They had given no reason. They did not like wetlanders very much at the best. But to the Aiel, it had been required by Giotto. During the long years of journey that had brought them to the waste, only one people had not attacked them. Only one had allowed them water uncontested when the world grew parched. And finally they had found the descendants of those people, the Cairhienin. For 500 years, riches had flowed into Cairhien with the silk and the ivory. 500 years, Lavender Aldera knew why the Aiel had crossed the spine years ago. They called it Lehman's Pride. But few it had not been had come to find an Oathbreaker. When they had killed him, they returned to the threefold land. But their contempt for the tree killers, the Oathbreakers, had never died. Moraine being Aes Sedai offset her being Cairhienin, but Rand was never sure how much. "These folk broke no oaths," he told them. "Find the others. The Saddlemaker says there are about 100, and be gentle with them. If any of them were watching, they're probably running away into the..." The two Aiel started to turn away, and he added, "Do you hear what they told me? What do you think of what Couladin did here?" "They killed more than they had to," Derek said with a disgusted shake of his head. "Like black ferrets falling on rock-hens' nests in a gully. Killing was as easy as dying, so any fool." Now the other thing, taking prisoners, Gai'Shain. Ruark and Derek exchanged looks, and Derek's mouth tightened. Clearly they had heard, and it made them uncomfortable.
Chips again.
It took a great deal to make an Aiel uncomfortable. "It cannot be so. If it is, Gai'Shain is a thing of Giotto. No one can be made Gai'Shain who does not follow Giotto. Else they are only
Hey, Fire, how you doing, bro?
such as the Shah.
Just cleaning the tip real
Couladin
quick
is a
here.
friend in Giotto." Derek sounded as though he were saying stones had grown wings. Matt guided Pips closer, using his knees. He had never been more than an indifferent rider, but sometimes, when he was thinking of something else, he rode as though born on a horse's back. "That surprises you," he said. "After everything he has done already, the man would cheat at dice with his mother." They gave him flat-eyed stares, but blue stones. In many ways, Aiel were Giotto. And whatever else Couladin was, he was still Aiel in their eyes. Sept before clan, clan before outsiders, but Aiel before wetlanders. Some of the maidens joined them, Anila and Jolene and Adeline, and wiry white-haired Sulin, who had been chosen roof mistress of the Roof of the Maidens in Rudian. She had told the maidens who stayed to choose another, and now she led the maidens here. They sensed the mood and said nothing, only grounded their spear points patiently, An Aiel who wanted to could make the rocks look hasty. Lan broke the silence. If Couladin expects you to be following him, he may have left a surprise somewhere in the pass. 100 men could hold some of those narrows against an army. 1,000? We will camp here then, Rand said, and send scouts ahead to make sure the way is clear. Duada Madiin? Water Seekers, Derek agreed, sounding pleased. That had been his society before he became clan chief. Sulin and the other maidens gave Rand flat stares as the Rain Chief walked away down slope. He had chosen scouts from other societies for the last 3 days when he had begun to fear what he might find here. And he had the feeling they knew he was not just giving the others their turns. He tried to...
Hope everyone's doing good this evening.
Sulin's was especially difficult. The woman could have driven nails with those pale blue eyes. Ruark, once the survivors are found, see that they're fed and well treated. We will take them with us. His gaze was drawn to the town wall. Some Aiel were already using their curved horn bows to kill ravens. Sometimes Shadowspawn used ravens
That's crazy.
and other animals that fed on death as spies. Shadow eyes, the Aiel called them. These barely paused in the frenzied feeding until they fell transfixed with an arrow. But a wise man did not take chances with ravens or...
Always sucks when power goes out. We've had that happen here a couple of times.
At least in that,
Oh, damn it.
and necessity were the same. Chapter 21. The Gift of a Blade. The camp began to go up quickly in the mouth of Jengai Pass, away from Tyan, and spreading over the hills around the approaches, and among the scattered thorn bushes, and even onto the slopes of the mountains. Not that anything was very visible except what was inside the pass. Aiel tents blended into the stony soil so well that you could miss them, even when you knew what you were looking for and where. In the hills, the Aiel camped by clan, but those in the pass itself grouped themselves by society. They were mostly maidens, but the men's societies sent their representatives too, some 50 each, spreading tents well above the ruins of Tyan in slightly separated camps. Everyone understood, or thought they did, about the maidens carrying Rand's honor, but all societies wanted to guard the Karakara. Moiraine, and Lan, of course, went to get Kadir's wagons settled just below the town. The Aes Sedai fussed over what was in those wagons nearly as much as she did over Rand. The drivers muttered and cursed about the town's smell and avoided watching the Aiel cut bodies down from the wall. But after their months in the waste, they seemed to like being close even to the wreckage of what they saw as civilization. Guy Shine were erecting the Wise Ones' tents, those of Amis and Bear and Mullane, below the town, astride the faded track that led up out of the hills. Rand was sure they would say they had chosen the spot to be available to him, as well as to the countless dozens of Wise Ones below. But he thought it no coincidence that anyone coming up from the hills to him would have to go through or around their camp to reach him. He was a little surprised to see Mullane directing the white-robed figures. Only 3 nights before, she had married Bael in a ceremony that made her his wife and first sister to his other wife, Dorinda. That part had been just as important as the marriage, apparently. Aviendha had been shocked at his surprise, or maybe angry. When Egwene arrived with Aviendha up behind her on the gray mare, those full skirts pushed above their knees, they looked a matched pair despite their different coloring, and Aviendha being tall enough to look over Egwene's shoulder without stretching, each with just one ivory bracelet and one necklace. The work of removing the hanged corpses had barely begun. Most of the ravens lay dead, bundles of black feathers littering the ground, and the rest had flown. But vultures, too gorged to flap aloft, still waddled through the
Right, that's when the power goes out.
Rand wished that there was some way he could keep the 2 women from having to see, but to his surprise, neither went running to empty her stomach. Well, he had not really expected anything of the sort from Aviendha. She had seen death often enough, and dealt it out, too, and her face remained expressionless. But he had not expected the pure pity in Egwene's eyes as she gazed at the bloated dead coming down. She drew mist over to Jotun, and leaned to put a hand on his arm. I'm so sorry.
Oh, yeah. Cheers.
There was no way you could have stopped this. I know, he told her. He had not even known there was a town here until Ruark mentioned it casually 5 days ago. His councils with the chiefs had all been on whether they could cover more ground in a day, and what Couladin would do when he cleared the Jangai. And by that time, the Shaido had finished here and gone. He had done with cursing himself for a fool then. Well, just you remember it. It was not your fault. She heeled Mist on and began talking to Avienda before she was out of earshot. I'm glad he is taking it so well. He has the habit of feeling guilty over things he cannot control. Men always believe they are in control of everything around them, Avienda replied. When they find out they are not, they think they have failed. Instead of learning a simple truth women already know. Egwene giggled. That is the simple truth. Once I saw those poor people, I thought we would find him heaving somewhere. Is his stomach so tender? Their voices faded away as the mare ambled on. Rand pulled himself back upright in the saddle, flushing. Trying to eavesdrop on them. He was behaving like an idiot. But that did not stop him frowning at their departing backs. He only took responsibility for what he was accountable for, if only to himself. Just for things he could do something about. And what he should have done something about. He did not like them talking about him, behind his back or under his nose. The light only knew what they were saying. Dismounting, he led Jadin in search of Osmodian, who seemed to have wandered off. After so many days in the saddle, it was good to walk. Various clusters of tents were springing up along the pass. The mountain slopes and cliffs made formidable barriers, but the Aiel still arranged themselves as if they could expect attack.
Some lemon haze, hell yeah.
He had tried walking with the Aiel, but half a day was enough to put him back on the horse. It was hard enough to keep up with them mounted. They could wear out horses when they pressed. Mat was down too, squatting with his reins in one hand and that black-hafted spear across his knees, peering at the gaping gates, studying the town and muttering to himself while Pips tried to nibble at a thorn bush. Mat was studying, not just staring. Where did that remark about sentries come from? Mat said odd things at times now, since their first visit.
About to do another dab. I just
Rand wished
gotta
they
say
were
which
willing
one.
to talk about what had happened, but he still denied that anything had, despite the fox-head medallion, the spear, and that scar around his neck. Melindra, the Shaido maiden that Mat had taken up with, was off to one side watching Mat, until Sulin came and chased her away on some errand. Rand wondered if Mat knew the maidens were laying bets on whether Melindra would give up the spear for him, and on whether she would teach him to sing, too, though they only laughed when Rand asked what that meant. The sound of music drew him to Osmodian, seated by himself on a granite outcrop with his harp on his knee. The crimson banner's staff had been twisted into the rocky soil, and the mule tethered to it. You see, my lord dragon, he said cheerfully, your bannerman keeps loyally to his duties. His voice and expression changed, and he said, if you must have this thing, why not let Mat carry it, or Lan? Or Moraine, for that matter. She would be glad to carry your banner, and clean your boots. Be careful of her. She is a devious woman. When a woman says she will obey you, of her own will, it is time to sleep lightly and watch your back. You carry it because you were chosen, Master Jason McDale. Osmodian gave a start and looked around, though everyone else was too far away and too busy to be listening. None but they too would have understood anyway. What do you know about those ruins up near the snow line? They must come from the Age of Legends. Osmodian did not even glance up the mountain. This world is very changed from the world I went to sleep in. He sounded weary, and he shivered slightly. What I know of what lies where, I've learned since waking. The mournful sounds of the March of Death rose from his heart. That could be what is left of the city where I was born, for all I know. Shorel was a port. The sun had maybe an hour before the spine of the world hit it. This close to high mountains, night came early. I am too tired for one of our discussions tonight. That was what they called Osmodian's lessons in public, even when no one was around. Added to practice sessions with Lan Aruak, those lessons had left him little time for sleep since leaving Rudion. You take to your tent when you're ready, and I'll see you in the morning, with the banner. There was no one else to carry the bloody thing. Maybe he could find somebody in Cairhien. As he was turning away, Asmodian plucked something discordant and said, "No burning nets woven around my tent tonight. Do you finally begin to trust me?" Rand looked back over his shoulder. "I trust you like a brother, until the day you betray me. You have a parole for what you've done, in return for your teaching, and a better bargain than you deserve. But the day you turn against me, I will tear it up and bury it with you." Osmodian opened his mouth, but Rand forestalled him. "That is me talking, Nateo. Randolph Thor. Two Rivers folk don't like people who try to stab them in the back." Irritably, he pulled at the Dapple's reins and went on before the other man could say anything. He was not sure whether Osmodian had any inkling that a dead man was trying to take him over, but he should not have let himself give the man hints. Osmodian was sure enough already that he was a helpless cause, if he began to think that Rand was not in full control of his own mind. Perhaps that he was going mad. The Forsaken would abandon him in a heartbeat, and there was too much Rand had to learn yet. White-robed Guy Shine were erecting his tent under Avienda's direction, well into the pass mouth, with that huge carved snake rearing above. The Guy Shine had their own tents, but those were pass directed, of course. Adeline and a dozen or so maidens squatted nearby, watching, waiting to guard his sleep. Even with over 1,000 maidens encamped around him every night, they still put a guard on his tent. Before approaching, he reached out through the Angreal in his coat pocket to see Saidin. There was no need to actually touch the carving of the fat little man with a sword, of course. Mingled filth and sweetness filled him, that raging river of fire, that crushing avalanche of ice. Channeling as he had done every night since leaving Rudion, he set wards around the entire encampment, not only what was in the pass, but every tent in the hills below as well, and on the slopes of the mountains. He needed the Angreal to set warding so large, but only just. He had thought that he was strong before, but Asmodian's teaching were making him stronger. No human or animal crossing the line of that ward would notice anything, but shadow spawn that touched it would sound a warning that everyone in the tents would hear. Had he done this in Rudion, the Darkhounds could never have entered without him knowing. The Aiel themselves would have to keep watch for new enemies. Wardings were complex weaves, if tenuous, and trying to make them do more than one thing could
something on my phone.
Practicality. He could have made this one to kill Shadow Spawn instead of merely giving warning, but that would have been like a beacon to any male Forsaken who might be searching, and to Myrddraal too. No need to bring his enemies down on him when they might not know where he was. This, even one of the Forsaken would not know until he was close, and a Myrddraal not until it was too late. Letting go of Saidin was an exercise in self-control, despite the foulness of the taint, despite the way the power tried to scour him away like sand on a riverbed, to burn him, obliterate him. He floated in the vast emptiness of the void, yet he could feel the air stirring against each hair on his head, see the weave of the Guy Shine's robes, smell Avienda's warm scent. He wanted more. But he could smell the ashes of Tyon, too. Smell the dead who had been burned, the corruption of those who had not.
Okay, let's see.
Even the ones already burned, filled with the dry soil of their graves.
Let's do a dab of this one.
That helped. For a while after Saidin was gone, all he did was take deep breaths of hot, inert air. Compared to before, the whiff of death seemed absent, and the air itself pure and wonderful. "Look what was here before us," Avienda said, as he let a meek-faced, white-robed woman take Jiat. She held up a brown snake, dead, but as thick as his forearm, and nearly 3 paces long.
Okay.
The blood snake took its name from the effect of its bite, turning the blood to jelly in minutes.
Nice and
Unless he
clean
missed
now.
his guess, the neat wound behind its head had come from her belt knife. Adeline and the other maidens looked approving. Did you ever for 1 minute think that it could have bitten you? He said. Did you ever think of using the power instead of a bloody belt knife? Why didn't you kiss it first? You had to be close enough. She drew herself up, and her big green eyes should have brought on the night's chill early. The wise ones say it is not good to use the power too often. The clipped words were as cold as her eyes. They say it is possible to draw too much and harm yourself. Frowning slightly, she added, more to herself than him. Though I have not come near what I can hold yet, I am sure. Shaking his head, he ducked into the tent. The woman would not listen to reason. No sooner had he settled himself against a silk cushion near the still unlit fire than she followed him. Without the blood snake, thankfully, but gingerly carrying something long, wrapped in thick layers of gray-striped blanket. You were worried for me, she said in a flat voice. There was no expression at all on her face. Of course not, he lied. Fool woman. She'll get herself killed yet because she doesn't have the sense to be careful when it's needed. I'd have been as worried for anyone. I would not want anyone bitten by a blood snake. For a moment, she eyed him doubtfully, then gave a quick nod. Good. So long as you do not presume toward me. Tossing the bundled blanket at his feet, she sat on her heels across the fire pit from him. You would not accept the bundle canceling debt between us. Avienda, there is no
Let's
debt.
do a dab.
He thought that she had forgotten about that. She went on as if he had not spoken. But perhaps that will cancel it. Sighing, he unwrapped the striped blanket. Warily, since she had held it far more uneasily than she had the snake. She had held the bloody snake as if it were a piece of cloth. Unwrapped it and gasped. What lay inside was a sword, the scabbard so encrusted with rubies and moondrops that it was hard to see the gold except where a rising sun rays had been inside. The ivory hilt, long enough for 2 hands, and another inlaid rising sun in gold. The pommel was thick with rubies and moondrops, and still more made a solid mass along the hilt. This had never been made to use, only to be seen, to be stared at. This must have cost. Avienda, how could you pay for it? It cost little, she said, so defensively that she might as well have added that she lied. A sword? How did you ever come by a sword? How did any Aiel come by a sword? Don't tell me Kadir had this hidden in his wagons. She sounded even more touchy now than she had about the price. Even Bear said that would make it all right, so long as I did not actually touch it. She shrugged uncomfortably, reshifting her shawl. It was the tree killer's sword. It was taken from his body as proof that he was dead, because his head could not be brought back so far. Since then, it has passed from hand to hand, young men or fool maidens who wanted to own the proof of his death. Only each began to think of what it was, and soon sold it to another fool. The price has come down very far since it was first sold. No Aiel would lay hand to it, even to remove the stones. Well, it is very beautiful, he said, as tactfully as he could manage. Only a buffoon would carry something this gaudy, and that ivory hilt would twist in a hand slippery with sweat or blood. But I cannot let you. He trailed off as he bared a few inches of the blade, out of habit, to examine the edge. Etched into the shining steel stood a heron, symbol of a blade master. He had carried a sword marked like that once. Suddenly he was ready to bet that this blade was like it, like the raven-marked blade on Mat's spear. Metal made with power that would never break and never need sharpening. Most Blade Master's swords were only copies of those. Lad could tell him for certain, but he was sure already in his own mind. Pulling the scabbard off, he leaned across the fire pit to place it in front of her. "I will take the blade to cancel the debt, Avienda." It was long and slightly curved with a single edge. "Just the blade. You can have the hilt back, too." He could have a new hilt and scabbard made at Kyrian. Maybe one of Tayan's survivors was a decent bladesmith. She stared wide-eyed from the scabbard to him and back, mouth open, stunned for the first time that he had ever seen. "But those gems are worth much, much more than I... You are trying to put me in your debt again, Rand al'Thor." "Not so. If this blade had lain untouched and untarnished in its scabbard for over 20 years, it had to be what he thought. I did not accept the scabbard, so it has been yours all along." Tossing one of the silk cushions into the air, he executed the seated version of the form called Low Wind Rising. Feathers rained down as the blade sliced neatly through. "And I don't accept the hilt either, so that's yours too. If you have made a profit, it is your own doing." Instead of looking happy at her good fortune, he suspected she had given everything that she had for the sword, and likely gotten back 100 times as much or more in the scabbard alone. Instead of seeming glad or thanking him, she glared through the feathers as indignantly as any good wife in the Two Rivers, seeing her floor littered. Stiffly, she clapped, and one of the Gaishain appeared, immediately going to her knees to begin cleaning up the mess. "It is my tent," he said pointedly. Avienda sniffed at him in perfect imitation of Egwene. Those two women were definitely spending too much time together. Supper, when it came at full dark, consisted of the usual flat pale bread and a spicy stew of dried peppers and beans with chunks of nearly white meat. He only grinned at her when he learned that it was the blood snake. He had eaten snake, and worse, since coming to the waste. Gara, the poisonous lizard, was the worst in his estimation, not for the taste, which was rather like chicken, but because it was lizard. It sometimes seemed that there must be more poisonous things, snakes, lizards, spiders, or waste, than in the rest of the world combined. Avienda appeared disappointed that he did not spit the stew out in disgust, though sometimes it was difficult to tell what she was feeling. At times, she seemed to take great pleasure in discomforting her. Had he been trying to pretend that he was Aiel, he would have thought she was trying to prove he was not. Tired and eager for sleep, he only took off his coat and boots before crawling into his blankets and turning his back to Avienda. Aiel men and women might take sweat baths together, but a short time in Shinar, where they did something much better, convinced him that he was not made for that sort of thing, not without going so red in the face that he died. He had tried not to listen to the rustle of her undressing beneath her own blankets. At least she had that much modesty. But he kept his back turned anyway, just in case. She claimed she was supposed to sleep there to continue his lessons on Aiel ways and customs, since he spent so much of his days with the chiefs. They both knew that was a lie, though what the wise ones thought she could find out this way, he could not imagine. She gave little grunts every now and then as she tugged at something and muttered to herself. To cover the sounds and stop himself thinking of what they must mean, he said, "Mollaine's wedding was impressive. Did Bale really know nothing about it until Mollaine and Dorinda told him?" "Of course not," she replied scornfully, pausing for what he thought was a stocking coming off. Why should he know before Mollaine laid the bridal wreath at his feet and asked him? Abruptly she laughed. "Mollaine nearly drove herself and Dorinda to distraction finding cicada blossoms for the wreath. Few grow so close to the dragon wall." "Does that mean something special? Cicada blossoms?" That was what he had sent her, the flowers she had never acknowledged. "That she has a prickly nature and means to keep it." Another pause, broken by mutters. "Had she used leaves or flowers from sweet root, it would have meant she claimed a sweet nature. Morning drop would mean she would be submissive, and there are too many to list. It would take me days to teach all the combinations to you, and you do not need to know them. You will not have an Aiel wife. You belong to Elaine." He nearly looked at her when she said submissive, a word less likely to describe any Aiel woman he could not conceive. Probably means she gives warning before she stabs you. There had been more of a muffled sound to her voice at the end. Pulling her blouse over her head, he realized. He wished the lamps were out. No, that would have made it worse. But then he had been through this every single night since Rhuidean, and every single night it was worse. He had to put an end to it. The woman was going to sleep with the wise ones, where she belonged from now on. He would learn what he could from her as he could. He had thought exactly the same thing for 15 nights now. Trying to chase the pictures out of his head, he said, that bit at the end, after the vows were said. No sooner had half a dozen wise ones pronounced their blessings than 100 of Melane's bloodkin had rushed in to surround her, all carrying their spears. 100 of Bale's kin had rallied to him, and he had fought his way to her. No one had been bailed, of course. It was all part of custom. But blood had still been shed on both sides. A few minutes before, Melaine was vowing that she loved him, but when he reached her, she fought like a cornered rich cat. If Dorinda had not punched her in the short ribs, he did not think Bale would ever have gotten her over his shoulder to carry off. He still has the limp and the black eye she gave him. Should she have been a weakling? Aviendha said sleepily. He had to know the worth of her. She was not a trinket for him to put in his pouch. She yawned, and he heard her nestling deeper into her blankets. What does teaching a man to sing mean? Aiel men did not sing, not once they were old enough to take up a spear, except for battle chants and laments for the dead. You are thinking of Matt Coughlin. She actually giggled. Sometimes a man gives up the spear for a maiden. You're making that up. I never heard of anything like that. Well, it is not really giving up the spear. Her voice held a thick muzziness. Sometimes a man desires a maiden who will not give up the spear for him, and he arranges to be taken gai'shain by her. He is a fool, of course. No maiden would look at gai'shain as he hopes. He has worked hard and kept strictly to his place. And the first thing that is done is to make him learn to sing, to entertain the Spear Sisters while they eat. She is going to teach him to sing. That is what maidens say when a man makes a fool of himself over one of the Spear Sisters. A very peculiar people. Aviendha. He had said he was not going to ask her this again. Lad said it was Kandori work, a pattern called snowflakes, probably loot from some raid up north. Well, who gave you that necklace? A friend, Randall Thor. We came far today, and you will start us early tomorrow. Sleep well and wake, Randall Thor. Only an Aiel would wish you a good night by hoping that you did not die in your sleep. Setting the much smaller, yet much more intricate ward on his dreams, he channeled the lamps out and tried to sleep. A friend. The rain came from the north. But she had had the necklace in Rhuidean. Why did he care? Aviendha's slow breathing seemed loud in his ears until he fell asleep. And then he dreamed a confused dream of Min and Elaine helping him throw Aviendha, wearing nothing but that necklace, over his shoulder, while she beat him over the head with a wreath of sagata blossoms. Chapter 22. Bird Calls by Night. Lying face down on his blankets with his eyes closed, Matt luxuriated in the feel of Melindra's thumbs, leading their way down his spine. There was nothing quite as good as a massage after a long day in the saddle. Well, some things were, but right then he was willing to settle for her thumbs. You are well muscled for such a short man, Matrim Cawthon. He opened one eye and glanced back at her, kneeling astride his hips. She had built up the fire twice as high as needed, and sweat trickled down her body. Her fine golden hair, close cut except for that Aiel tail at the nape of her neck, clung to her scalp. If I'm too short, you can always find somebody else. You are not too short for my taste, she laughed, ruffling his hair. It was longer than hers. And you are cute. Relax. This does no good if you tense. Grunting, he closed
All
his eyes
right.
again.
He got his butt whooped for her.
Light. And short. Only Aiel could call him short. In every other land he had been in, he was taller than most men, if not always by much. He could remember being tall. Taller than Rand, when he rode against Arthur Hawkling. And a hand shorter than he was now when he fought beside Maycene against the Elgari. He had spoken to Lam, claiming he had overheard some names. The warder said Maycene had been a king of Aeron, one of the 10 nations. That much Matt already knew, some 400 or 500 years before the Trolloc Wars. Lan doubted that even the Brown Archer knew more. Much had been lost in the Trolloc Wars, and more in the War of the 100 Years. Those were the earliest and latest of the memories that had been planted in his skull. Nothing after Arthur Peyendrag Tanrial, and nothing before Maycene of Aeron. Are you cold? Melindra said incredulously. You shivered. She scrambled off him, and he heard her add wood to the fire. There was enough scrub here for burning. She slapped his bottom hard as she climbed back up, murmuring, "Goodness. If you keep on like that," he muttered, "I'll think you mean to spit me for supper like a Trolloc." It was not that he did not enjoy Melindra, as long as she refrained from pointing out that she was tolerant away, but the situation made him uncomfortable. "No spits for you, Matrim Cawthon." Her thumbs dug hard into his shoulder. "That's it. Relax." He supposed that he would marry someday, settle down. That's what you did. A woman, a house, a family, shackled to one spot for the rest of his life. I never heard of a wife yet that liked her husband having a drink or a gamble. And there was what those folk on the other side of the doorframe Tirangriel had said, that he was fated to marry the daughter of the 9 moons. A man has to marry sooner or later, I suppose. But he certainly did not mean to take an Aiel wife. He wanted to dance with as many women as he could, while he could. "You are not made for spits, but for great honor, I think," Melindra said softly. "Sounds fine to me." Only now, he could not get another woman to look at him. Not the maidens, or the others. It was as if Melindra had hung a sign on him saying, "Owned by Melindra of the Jumai Shido." Well, she would not have to put that last bit on. Not here. Then again, who knew what an Aiel would do, especially a maiden of the spear? Women did not think the same as men, and Aiel women did not think like anybody else in the world. "It is strange that you efface yourself so." "Efface myself?" he mumbled. Her hands did feel good. Knots were coming out that he had not known were there. Well, he wondered if it had something to do with that necklace. Melindra seemed to set great store by it, or by receiving it anyway. She never wore the thing, of course. Maidens did not. But she carried it in her pouch and showed it to every woman who asked. A lot of them seemed to. "You put yourself in the shadow of Randall Thor." "I am not in anybody's shadow," he said absently. It could not be the necklace. He had given jewelry to other women, maidens and others. He liked giving things to pretty women, even if all he got in return was a smile. He never expected more. If a woman did not enjoy a kiss and a cuddle as much as he did, what was the point? Of course, there is honor of a sort in being in the shadow of the Khan. To be near the mighty, you must stand in their shade. Shade.
Do another dab. Let's do some train wreck this
Sometimes
time.
women accepted, and sometimes not. But none had decided they owned him. That was what rankled, really. He was not about to be owned by any woman, however pretty she was, and no matter how good her hands were at loosening knotted muscles. Your scars should be honor, earned in your own name as a chief, not this. One finger traced along the hanging scar on his neck. Did you earn this serving the clown card? Shrugging her hand away, he pushed up on his elbows and twisted to look at her. Are you sure Daughter of the Nine Moons doesn't mean anything to you? I have told you it does not. Lie down. If you are lying to me, I swear I'll welt your rump. Hands on hips, she looked down at him dangerously. Do you think you can welt my rump, Matt Coffin? I'll give it my best try. She would
There we go.
But these horns grew out of that too human head, and below the eyes, a goat's muzzle thrust out. Snarling, the Trolloc lunged at him and howled in a harsh language never meant for a human tongue.
Not sure what happened there,
Spun his spear
guys,
like a
but
quarterstaff, knocking the heavy curved blade
I
to one
apologize
side,
for that.
and thrust his long spear point into the creature's middle, mail parting
We're
for that
back.
power-made steel as easily as the flesh beneath.
Not sure what happened there.
Pulled it over with a harsh cry.
Just for that, let's
Weapon free,
actually do what I was actually going to do before
all around him,
that happened.
some unclothed, or only half, but all black-veiled, fought Trollocs with tusked boars' snouts, or wolves' muzzles, or eagles' beaks. Some were
That's
heads
crazy.
horned, or crested with
I don't
feathers.
know what happened there.
Wielding oddly curved swords and spiked axes, hooked tridents and spears. Here and there, one used a huge bow to shoot barbed arrows the size of small spears. Men fought alongside the Trollocs too, in rough coats with swords, shouting desperately as they died among the thorn bushes. Samael! Samael and the golden bees! The Dark Friends were dying, most as soon as they
Right,
engaged
cheers.
Nihil. But the Trollocs died harder. I am no bloody hero, Matt shouted to no one in particular as he battled a Trolloc with a bear's muzzle and hairy ears, his third. The creature carried a long axe with half a dozen sharp spikes and a flaring blade big enough to split a tree, throwing it about like a toy in those great hairy hands. It was being near Rand that got Matt into these things. All he wanted from life was some good wine, a game of dice, and a pretty girl or three. I don't want to be mixed up in this, especially not if Samael was around. Do you hear me? The Trolloc went down with a ruined throat and found himself facing a Myrddraal, just as it finished killing two Aiel who had come at it together. The half-man looked like a man, pasty pale, armored in black overlapping scales like a snake's. It moved like a snake too, boneless and fluid and quick, like black cloak hanging still, however it darted. And it had no eyes, just a dead white sweep of skin where eyes should be. That eyeless gaze turned on him, and he shivered, fear oozing along his bones. The look of the eyeless is fear, they said in the Borderlands, where they should know. And even Aiel admitted that a Myrddraal's stare sent chills through the marrow. That was the creature's first weapon. The half-men came at him in a flowing run. With a roar, Matt rushed to meet it, spear spinning like a quarterstaff, thrusting, ever moving. The thing carried a blade as dark as its cloak, a sword hammered at the forges of Thakandar. And if that cut him, he was as good as dead. Moiraine appeared quickly with her healing. But there was only one sure way to take down a Fade. All-out attack. You had to overwhelm it before it overwhelmed you. And a thought for defense could be a good way to die. He could not even spare a glance for the battle raging around him in the night. The Myrddraal's blade flickered like a serpent's tongue, darted like dark lightning. But to counter Matt's attack,
this cool little thing
when
I can
Raven
use
marked
for it.
power raw steel met Thakandar-made metal, blue light flashed around them, a crackle of sheet lightning. Suddenly Matt's slashing attack struck flesh. Black sword and pale hand flew away, and the reverse stroke sliced open the Myrddraal's throat, but Matt did not stop. Thrust through the heart, cut to one hamstring, then the other, all in rapid succession. Only then did he step away from the thing still thrashing on the ground, flailing about with its good hand and severed stump, wounds spilling inky blood. Halfmen took a long time to admit that they were dead. They did not die completely, except with a setting sun. Looking around, Matt realized that the attack was over. Whatever Dark Friends or Trollocs were not dead had fled. At least he saw none standing except Aiel. Some of them were down too. He plucked a kerchief from the neck of a Dark Friend corpse to wipe the Myrddraal's black blood from his spear point. It would etch the metal if left too long. This night assault made no sense. By the bodies he could see in the moonlight, Trolloc and human, none had made it much past the first line of tents. And without far greater numbers, they could not have hoped for more. What was that you called out?
3 temp settings.
The old tongue. He turned to look at Melindra. She had unveiled, but she still wore not a stitch more than her shufa. There were other maidens about, and men, wearing as little and showing as little concern, though
And
most
it
did seem to
res
be
the
heading
high.
back to their tents without lingering. They had no modesty. That was it. No modesty at all. She even seemed to feel the cold, though her breath made wisps of mist. He was as sweaty as she, and freezing now that he had no fight for his life to occupy his mind. "Something I heard once," he told her. "Like the sound of it."
It helps too that
For the honor of the Red Eagle. The battle cry of Manetheren. Most of his
at one
memories were
time,
from Manetheren.
me and my
Some of those he
brother,
had before
most
the first
hated
doorway.
grower, used to work at
Said it was the old blood coming
a
out.
smoke shop. We sold
Just as long as it did
pipes,
not come out of his veins.
smoking accessories.
She put an arm around his shoulders as
So
he
we've
started back
collected a
over.
lot of stuff,
I
a lot
saw
of
you with the night runner.
hand pipes,
That was one of the Aiel names for Murdral.
a lot of water
You were as
pipes.
tall as a man needs to be. Grinning, he slipped his arm around her waist, but he could not get the attack out of his head. He wanted to. His thoughts were too snarled in his borrowed memories, but he could not.
This one came
Why
from
had anyone launched such a
a local smoke shop in town.
A fool attacked overwhelming force without
It
reason.
was called Bud
That
Boards,
was the thought. He could not
but it has
compromise.
3 temp settings.
No one attacked.
It could fit how my cart fit in there. It could fit the
bird calls pulled Rand away
half
completely,
all the
and
way
he
up
seized
to the
Saidin
2 gram
as he
carts
tossed the
that you
blankets
can have
aside
in
and
here.
ran out, coatless in his stocking.
And its main purpose is to,
The night was cold.
instead of
and moonlit.
having a stick
Sounds of
in it
battle
looking
drifting out
like
from the hills below the pass.
what it is, of it
Around
being
him,
a cart,
stirred like scurrying ants,
to
rushing into the night.
when it
where
looks like this, it
come
looks
near the
just like
pass.
one of those
The wards would signal
those
again.
nicotine
Shadow spawn in the
vapes you
pass
can
would
get at
cause
the
a
smoke
winter judge to
shops.
call. Until
Similar
the
style,
11th in the
so
morning. But
it
there
makes
was
it
no
look
point
like it's a
in taking foolish
nicotine
chances.
one when it's
Soon
not,
the
so you
pass
can
was
smoke
still
it more
again.
in public
Sunshine
areas.
in their tents, forbidden weapons even now. The other Aiel, off at the places that might need defending. Even Adeline and the other maidens had gone, as if they knew he would have held them back if they waited.
So that's why it looks like that.
He could
Just
hear a few mutters
and there's
from
no
wagons
buttons,
near the
just
town walls, but
it goes by
neither the
draw.
drivers nor Kadir showed themselves. He did not expect them to. The faint sounds of battle, men shouting, screaming, dying, came from 2 directions,
Then it has
both below, well away from him.
the charger, and
People were
that
outside
button
the Wise One's tents too,
changes the temp,
staring toward the fighting. It seemed.
and then it has like a preheat,
An attack down
feature,
there made no sense.
and then you can also turn it off.
Not
But it
unless
looks just
Timberlake
like your
taken shadow spawn into his
regular
mind.
run of the
That
mill
was as likely as white
nicotine
clothes with moving
vaping.
collars.
It's a
He turned back toward his tent,
preloaded cart.
and even enclosed in the void, he gave a start. Avienda had come out into the moonlight, a blanket wrapped around her. Just beyond her stood a tall man shrouded in a dark cloak. Moon shadows drifted over a gaunt face that was too pale, with eyes too large. A crooning rose, and the cloak opened into wide, leathery wings like those of a bat. Moving as in a dream, Avienda drifted toward the waiting embrace. Rand channeled.
Which I like,
The thin bale
and
fire burned past her.
versus the
An
stick
arrow of
too.
solid light.
If you have it in your
Take the dark
pocket,
car
you always
in the
gotta
hand.
worry about it.
The
It
effect of
breaking
that narrower stream was slower
or whatnot.
but no
Where
less
we have
sure
it, just
than with the dark hounds.
because it's a stick battery.
The creature's colors reversed.
Versus
Black and
this,
white,
you
black,
can just put it in your shirt pocket
and it became sparkling
or in your
rose that
pant
melted in
pocket.
air.
Turn it off, and you don't have to worry about breaking your cart.
Stared at the last particles as they vanished, and turned to Rand, gathering the blanket closer. Her hand came up, and a stream of fire as thick as his head roared toward him. Startled even inside the emptiness, never thinking of the power, he threw himself to the ground beneath the billowing flames. They died in an
Which
instant.
I like just convenience. Just
"What are you doing?" he barked, so angry, so shocked that the void cracked and Saidin vanished from him. He scrambled to his feet, stalking toward her. "This is the gratitude I ever heard of." He was going to say something when she fell. "I should have told you in case you failed to notice. And if I offended some bloody Aiel custom. I don't give a... The next time, she snapped back, I will leave the great Ka Karn to deal with matters by himself. Awkwardly clutching the blanket close, she ducked stiff-backed into the tent. For the first time, he looked behind him, at another Drakkar, crumpled on the ground in flames. He had been so angry that he had not heard the crackling and popping as it burned, had not smelled the odor of burning grease. He had not even sensed the evil of it. A Drakkar killed first by sucking the soul away and then life. It had to be close, touching, but this one lay no more than 2 paces from where he had been standing. He was not certain how effective a Drakkar's pruning embrace was against someone filled with saidin, but he was glad he had not found out.
I might just keep it in this now.
Drawing a deep breath, he knelt beside the tent flap.
And just put this aside.
He could not go in. A lamp was lit in there, and she could be sitting there naked for all he knew, mentally ripping him up and down the way he deserved. Aviendha, I'm sorry. I apologize. I was a fool to speak as I did without asking why. I should know that you wouldn't harm me, and I'm a fool, he finished weakly. A great deal you know, Randolph Thor, came a muffled reply. You are a fool. How did Aiel apologize? He never asked her that. Considering Jiatou, teaching men to sing, and wedding customs, he did not think he would. Yes, I am. And I apologize. There was no answer this time. Are you in your blankets? Silence. Muttering to himself, he stood, working his stocking toes on the icy ground. He was going to have to remain out here until he was sure she was decently covered, without boots or coat. He seized hold of saidin, taint and all, just to be distanced from the bone-grinding cold inside the void. The 3 Wise One Dreamwalkers came running, of course, and Egwene, all staring at the burning Drakkar as they skirted it, drawing their shawls around them with almost the same motion. Only one, Hamis said. I thank the light, but I am surprised. There were 2, Rand told her. I destroyed the other. Why should he be hesitant just because Moiraine had warned him against balefire? It was a weapon like any other. If Aviendha had not killed this one, it might have gotten me. The feel of her channeling drew us, Egwene said, looking him up and down. At first he thought she was checking for injuries, but she paid special attention to his stocking feet, then glanced at the tent, where a crack in the tent flap showed lamplight. You've upset her again, haven't you? She saved your life and you... Man! With a disgusted shake of her head, she brushed past him and into the tent. He heard faint voices, but could not make out what was being said. Moiraine gave a hitch to her shawl. If you do not need us, then we must see what is happening below. She hurried off without waiting for the other 2. Bear cackled as she and Hamis followed. A wager on who she will check on first. My amethyst necklace that you like so much against that sapphire bracelet of yours? Done. I choose Dorinda. The older Wise One cackled again. Her eyes are still full of bale. A first sister is a first sister, but a new husband. They moved down out of earshot, and he bent toward the tent flap. He could still not hear what they were saying, not unless he stuck his ear to the crack, and he was not about to do that. Surely Aviendha had covered herself with Egwene in there. Then again, the way Egwene had taken to Aiel ways, it was just as likely she had peeled out of her clothes instead. The soft sound of slippers announced Moiraine and Lan, and Rand straightened. Though he could hear both of them breathing, the warder's steps still made barely an audible noise. Moiraine's hair hung about her face, and she held a dark robe around her, the silk shining with the moon. Lan was fully dressed, booted and armed, wrapped in that cloak that made him part of the night. Of course, the clamor of fighting was dying down in the hills below. I'm surprised you were not here sooner, Moiraine. His voice sounded cold, but better his voice than him. He held on to saidin, fought it, and the night's icy chill remained something far off. He was aware of it, aware of each hair on his arms stirring with cold beneath his shirt sleeves, but he did not touch it. You usually come looking for me as soon as you sense trouble. I have never explained all that I do, or do not do. Her voice was as cool and mysterious as it had ever been, yet even in the moonlight, Rand was certain that she was blushing. Lan looked troubled, though with him it was difficult to tell. I cannot hold your hand forever. Eventually, you must walk alone. I did that tonight, didn't I? Embarrassment slid across the void. That sounded as though he had done everything himself, and he added, Aviendha all but took one off my back. The flames in the Drakkar were burning low. As well as she was here then, Lorraine said calmly. You did not. Of that he was sure. He had seen her rush into the midst of Shadow Spawn, wielding the power as skillfully as Lan did. Seen it too often to be her. So why had she not come when she sensed the Drakkar? She could have, and Lan as well. That was one of the gifts a warder received from the bond between him and an Aes Sedai. He could make her tell, catch her between her oath to him and her inability to lie straight out. No, he could not. Or would not. He would not do that to someone who was trying to help him. At least now we know what the attack below was about, he said. To make me think something important was happening there, while the Drakkar slipped in on me. They tried that at Cold Rock's Hold, and it did not work there either. Only maybe it almost had this time. If that had been the intent. You would think they would try something different. Couladin ahead of him, the Forsaken everywhere, it seemed. Why could he not face one enemy at a time? Do not make the mistake of thinking the Forsaken simple, Lorraine said. That could easily be fatal. She shifted her robe as though wishing it were thicker. The hour is late. If you have no further need of me... Aiel began to drift back as she and the warder left. Some exclaimed over the Drakkar, and roused some of the Gaishain to drag it away, but most simply looked at it before going to their tents. They seemed to expect such things of him now. When Adolin and the maidens appeared, their soft-booted feet dragged. They stared at the Drakkar, being hauled away by white-robed men, and exchanged long looks before approaching Rand. There was nothing here, Adolin said slowly. The attack was all below. Dark Friends and Trollocs. Shouting Samael and the Golden Bees, I heard, added another. With her head wrapped in a shufa, Rand could not make out who she was. She sounded young. Some of the maidens were not more than 16. Taking a deep breath, Adolin held out one of her spears, horizontally in front of him, rock steady. The others did the same, one spear each. I failed, Adolin said. We should have been here when the Drakkar came. Instead, we ran like children to dance the spears. What am I supposed to do with those? Rand asked, and Adolin replied without hesitation. Whatever you wish, Kara-Khan. We stand ready and will not resist. Rand shook his head. Bloody Aiel and that bloody Giotto. You take those and go back to guarding my tent. Well, go! Looks passed between them before they began to obey, as reluctantly as they had approached him in the first place. And one of you tell Aviendha that I will be coming in when I return, he added. He was not going to spend the entire night outside, wondering whether it was safe. He stalked away, the stony ground hard under his feet. Osmodian's tent was not very far from his. There had not been a sound out of it. He whipped open the flap and ducked in. Osmodian was sitting in the dark, chewing his lip. He flinched when Rand appeared, and gave him no chance to speak. You did not expect me to take a hand, did you? I felt the Drakkar, but you could deal with those who did. I have never liked Drakkar. We should never have made them. They have fewer brains than a Trolloc. Give them an order, and they still sometimes kill whatever is closest. If I had come out, if I had done something, what if someone noticed? What if they realized it could not be you channeling? Well for you that you didn't, Rand cut him off, sitting cross-legged in the dark. If I had felt you full of sardine out there tonight, I might have killed you. The other man's laugh was shaky. I thought of that too. It was Samael who sent the attack tonight. The Trollocs and Dark Friends, anyway. It is not like Samael to throw men away, Asmodean said slowly. But he'll see 10,000 dead, or 10 times that, if it gains him what he thinks is worth the cost. Maybe one of the others wants you to think it was him. Even if the Aiel took prisoners, Trollocs do not think of much besides killing, and Dark Friends believe what they are told. It was him. He tried to bait me into attacking him once in the same way at Sarendahar. Oh, light. The thought drifted across the surface of the void. I said me. He did not know where Sarendahar had been, or anything but what he had said. The words had just come out. After a long silence, Asmodean said quietly, I never knew that. What I want to know is, why? Rand chose his words carefully, hoping that they were all his. He remembered Samael's face. A man. Not mine. Not my memory. A compact man with a short yellow beard. Asmodean had described all the Forsaken, but he knew this image was not made from that description. Samael had always wanted to be taller, and resented it that the power could not make him so. Asmodean had never told him that. From what you've told me, he is not likely to want to face me unless he is sure of victory. And maybe not then. You said he'd likely lead me to the Dark One if he could. So why is he sure he'll win now if I decide to go after him? They discussed it in the dark for hours without coming to any conclusion. Asmodean held to the opinion that it had been one of the others, hoping to send Rand against Samael, and thus get rid of one or both. At least Asmodean said that he did. Rand could feel the man's dark eyes on him, wondering.
Cheers, fire.
Too big to cover. When he finally returned to his own tent, Adolin and the dozen maidens all sprang to their feet. All of them at once, telling him that Egwene was gone and Aviendha long asleep. That she was angry with him. They both were. They gave so many different pieces of advice on handling the two women's anger, all at the same time, that he could understand none of it. Finally, they fell silent, looks passing between them, and Adolin spoke alone. We must speak of tonight, of what we did, and what we failed to do. It was nothing, he told her. And if it was something, it's forgiven and forgotten. I would like to have a few hours sleep for once. If you want to discuss it, go talk to Amis or Bear. I am sure they'll understand what you're after more than I do. That shut them up, surprisingly, and let him get inside. Aviendha was in her blankets, with one slim, bare leg sticking out. He tried not to look at it, or her. She had left a lamp lit. He climbed into his own blankets gratefully, and channeled the lamp out before releasing saidin. This time he dreamed of Aviendha hurling fire, only she was not hurling it at a Drakkar, and Samael was sitting at her side, laughing.
Chapter 23. The fifth I give you. Raining mist around on a grassy hilltop, Egwene watched the streams of Aiel coming down from the Jangai Pass. The saddle had pushed her skirts above her knees again, but she hardly noticed that now. She could not spend every minute fussing with them, and she had on stockings. It was not as though she were bare-legged. In trotting columns, the Aiel flowed by below her, arranged by clan and sept and society. Thousands upon thousands with their pack horses and mules, the Gaishain who would tend the camps while the rest fought, spreading a mile wide, and more still in the pass, were already out of sight ahead. Even without families, it seemed a nation on the march. The Silk Path had been a road here, a full 50 paces wide and paved with broad white stones, slicing straight through hills carved to make a level. Only occasionally was it visible through the mass of Aiel, although they seemed to prefer running on the grass, but
That
many
made
of
it,
the
boy.
paving stones had lifted up at a corner or sunk down at one end. More than 20 years had gone by since this road had carried more than local farmers' carts and a handful of wagons. It was startling to see trees again, real trees, towering oaks and leatherleaf in actual thickets, rather than an occasional wind-twisted, stunted shape, and tall grass waving in the breeze across the hills. There was real forest to the north, and clouds in the sky, thin and high, yet clouds. The air seemed blessedly cool after the waste, and moist, though brown leaves and large brown swaths through the grass told her that in reality it might be hotter and drier than usual for the time of year. Still, the countryside of Cairhien was a lush paradise compared to the other side of the Dragon Wall. A small stream meandered north beneath a nearly flat bridge, bordered by the dried clay of a broader valley. The river Balin lay not too many miles away in that direction. She wondered what the Aiel would make of that river. She had seen Aiel near a river once before. The shrunken band of water marked a definite break in the steady flow of people, as men and maidens paused to stare in amazement before leaping across. Kader's wagons rumbled by on the road, the long mule teams working hard but still losing ground to the Aiel. It had taken 4 days to traverse the twists and turns of the pass, and Rand apparently intended to go as far into Cairhien as he could in the few hours of daylight remaining. Moiraine was with the wagons, not ahead of them, or even in the box-like little white house on the road, but alongside the second wagon. The canvas-covered shape of the dwarf Grial made a hump above the rest of the load. Some of the load was wrapped carefully, or packed in boxes or barrels that Kader had brought into the waist full of his goods, and some was simply stuck in wherever it would fit. Odd shapes of metal and glass, a red crystal chair, 2 child-sized statues of a nude man and woman, rods of bone and ivory and strange black materials in varying lengths and thicknesses. All sorts of things, including some Egwene could hardly begin to see. Moiraine had used every inch of space in all of the wagons. Egwene wished that she knew why the Aes Sedai was so concerned with that particular wagon. Perhaps no one else had noticed that Moiraine paid it more attention than all the others combined, but she had. Not that she was likely to find out any time soon. Her newfound equality with Moiraine was a tender thing, as she had learned when she asked that question in the heart of the pass, and was told that her imagination was too vivid, and if she had time to spy on the Aes Sedai, perhaps Moiraine should speak to the Wise Ones about intensifying her training. She had apologized profusely, of course, and the soft words seemed to have worked. Amis and the others were not taking any more of her nights than they had before. 100 or so Tardad Far Daras Mai went trotting by on her side of the road, moving easily, veils hanging but ready to be donned, full quivers at hips. Some carried their curved horn bows, arrows nocked, while others had their bows cased on their backs, spears and bucklers swinging rhythmically as...
Alright, everyone. I'm probably gonna call Into This Life for tonight. See if I can't lay down and get a little bit of sleep. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone who keeps stopping by and chilling with me. Definitely appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone, y'all stay safe.